Morning, everyone. This is our first in-person Women in STEM seminar, and I'm very happy to participate in our panel.
Thank you for being here, either in person or online. I'm Professor Anne Robertson from Roehampton University, School of Government.
I'm Dr. Emma Cameron. I'm a research fellow based here at London.
And I am a lecturer in plant pathology at the University of Roehampton.
So what we've done is preliminary meeting about some of the general points that would make for a good discussion. So I'm going to just start off with the first one, which is reached us to say a little bit about our career progression as a woman in STEM. Where we started off, where we are now, how we got there. So, who wants to go first? I don't know.
So I started actually with an engineering degree in agronomy back in Spain, Valencia. And then I moved to the UK to do my PhD. So I first started in a research institute that's called Roehampton Research, right outside London. And halfway through my PhD, I moved to the University of Sheffield, but I was still a student of Lancaster University, so I moved quite a bit throughout the UK, around the UK. And I lived in Sheffield for 7 years. I finished my PhD, I did my postdoc, and then I got a fellowship there. And then a few years after, I also had a son, so I had a baby in the middle. And after that, I got a position in Birmingham as a lecturer. So that was a permanent position. And I moved from Sheffield to Birmingham with my fellowship and my family as well. So yeah, that is where I study, where I work now. So I study plant pathology, but I was always focusing in crops and model plants. So quite from a molecular point of view. But since I moved to Birmingham, I also put the system of forestry. So I want to know how forestry defend themselves in disease and how climate change will affect that defense capacity.
Yeah, so I did all of my education at Southampton, at the university there, undergraduate in marine biology, and then went, kind of incorporated the masters, and then went straight into the PhD there. And my masters had been in oysters, so like the reproductive success and the base of oysters. And I ended up doing a PhD in biological oceanography, going out to sea on research cruises, a lot of field work, fascinated, but we got to bubble for people. And essentially measuring how fast plankton moves in the ocean. So very much climate change kind of from quite early on in my career. And then I went and did a PhD at the University of Tasmania, which is in Australia. And I moved with my then partner, now husband. That's quite a big deal for us as a couple and for him. And then I got a postdoc back here at Imperial. I've kind of been here and working my way up the ranks. So yeah, still studying how climate change is affecting carbon cycling in the oceans and how important different animals are in sinking carbon in the oceans.
Well, that seems to me, and I'm just really impressed by how people who moved around the globe, really. I was saying we did a quick practice run of this, that I haven't moved around at all, actually. I did my undergraduate degree, actually, as well as my PhD in London, what's now King's College, and Royal Holloway, which is, that's far out as I've gone, actually. And then after that, I didn't do a postdoc because I was offered a permanent position as a lecturer. So I took that, obviously, really. Which has its disadvantages and advantages. Actually, the advantage, of course, is that you've got a permanent position and you can move on with the research that you want. The disadvantage is that you don't quite develop the sort of networks that you would as a postdoc, or at least not so quickly, at any rate. So there we are. I'm a freshwater ecologist, and I work on invertebrates. And so inevitably that's led me to climate change, because for invertebrates and microbial communities, of course, temperature is like the master variable, and any change in temperature is going to have a big effect on the metabolism and the development of the organisms that I like to work on. So I've so that's my history, if you like. So I mean, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about, and I don't know whether we've really covered this satisfactorily already, as a matter of fact, was we wanted to highlight particular aspects of our research that we thought might be interesting, and you know, particularly what drives us, if you like, to do the research that we do. So maybe if we each talk a little bit about what we do in the context of what makes it important to us, because nobody does it for fun, really. Well, I don't know, maybe they do. So I don't know, who would like to go? Oh yeah, I knew I'd forget that.
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned that I'm an ocean scientist. Started off a bit kind of biogeochemical and looking at carbon fluxes, but really all to do with biology and plankton in the ocean. And moving on to much larger organisms, well, krill. Antarctic krill are my like little pet species that I'm kind of a bit obsessed with. I will show anyone that will listen to this video that I made about them, or helped make. But yeah, so the species that I look at have a really crucial role in sinking carbon, so like right down to the deep ocean, into the sediments and into these water masses which can remain in the deep ocean, or at least away from the surface ocean, for kind of over 100 years. And that's kind of really important to me, is to stress how long any carbon that's sequestered is actually sequestered for, rather than just saying there's this magnitude of carbon. It's like really important for me to put that timestamp on it. And kind of looking at how human impacts are disturbing these systems and getting involved in policy is something that drives me. Personally, I find academia a fairly selfish career, in that we can go to work when we want, we can go home when we want, we're fairly flexible. Nobody's telling us, especially in a fellowship position that I'm in now, you know, what to do on a daily basis, which I think is a very unique position to be in. And I kind of can pursue any area of research that I find interesting. So what drives me is interacting with policy. So I mentioned I work with Antarctic krill. They're really abundant in the Southern Ocean and around Antarctica. They feed loads of charismatic megafauna, which we basically call, you know, what we like to watch on David Attenborough, like big blue whales and things like that. But also they're really important in carbon and nutrient cycling. And so working with the governing body that protects Antarctica on trying to prevent them being fished, and also to promote kind of climate policies as well. So there's kind of two angles of policy to do with both fishing and also like climate action. So it allows me to kind of at least think, hope, or pretend, or naive maybe, think that I'm having some kind of positive but very slow impact on society.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the most important things for me is the fact that the world population is growing, and we need to increase food production because we have this food security crisis. And one of the most important things that destroy crops, and nearly up to 23% of the total agricultural loss, can be attributed to pathogens. So for me, that was a really, it's the drive, no? Like, we need to feed people. There's a lot of hunger in this world already, and considering how the world population is growing, that's going to be much greater. So for me, that's one of the things that is pushing me to do my research and to try to work in sustainability, because there are many things that we cannot use, like, for example, pesticides. They also have, they are toxic to, you know, for the planet, for us, etc. And then, so that was kind of always my focus, no, like increasing, like securing food production and in a sustainable way, so we wouldn't have hunger in this planet. But then I also started working with Forestry and kind of like change a little bit the perspective, because it's not only the fact that we need to eat, but it's also the fact that we need to live in a world where we sustain forest, we maintain the natural habitats and the ecosystem. So when I was working with crops, I was kind of like isolated in my thinking of only growing the crops. But, you know, when you move to forestry, automatically you put yourself in a perspective of the whole ecosystem. And that for me is open really beautiful lines of research, and I do enjoy it. I think because I think everyone enjoys forest or nature, no, being outside and considering how important forests are for the capture of CO2 and you know, they are the lungs, no, of the planet. So that is something that has changed a lot my perception, and now I'm starting to think you know, a bit bigger into the, you know, into the bigger picture, really.
Okay, that leaves me then for this. So, so I'm a freshwater ecologist, and I've always been one because I'm particularly interested in rivers, as a matter of fact. And I think we've each come into our area in a very sort of twisty way, but nevertheless, you know, when I started off, I wanted to work on rivers, and I've sort of fulfilled that, if you like, not quite, but anyway, more or less. So, and I'm interested in interactions really between organisms and their environments and with each other. And over time, I mean, I started off looking at little tiny invertebrates in the mud at the bottom of rivers, because nobody had done that with those particular groups. These are microplastics. But then after a while, again, I sort of broadened things out a little bit. So, and what I did was I went sort of vertical, if you like. So rather than looking at animals in the mud of rivers, I started to look at them in hyporheic zones, which are this sort of ecotone between rivers and groundwater. So what happens there? And then more recently, looking at groundwaters themselves. So, and groundwaters are like you were saying you're passionate about krill. I'm quite passionate about groundwater, actually, because it's such an important reserve, if you like. So, I mean, I can't, you know, depending on where you are in the world, you know, probably you've got about 80% of the human population relying on groundwater for their daily needs, something like that. And everyone is very well aware of that, you know, with water companies and so on, abstracting and what have you. What's less obvious is the ecosystem that occurs in groundwaters. So, and these are typically invertebrates and the microbial community, and together they have a food web, you know, just the same as you have on the surface. They wouldn't be sequestering much carbon, actually, because it's a very energy poor system. There's not much energy by the time you get it down into groundwater. But nevertheless, you know, I find that particularly interesting to consider that. It's fun, if you like, in that sense. So, but also thinking about how you know, what happens under a climate change scenario. Abstraction increases maybe reducing the quantity of the habitat, but also what happens if you have pollution in these environments. So at the moment I'm working on with a project with microplastics in groundwater, what impact they have on this rather special ecosystem, special in my view. It is special because the animals only occur in groundwater, so they're you know, very, very unique to that. So, you know, and I do find it interesting, and I do have a sort of mini mission, if you like, to make people more aware of it. But I wouldn't, you know, we try very hard to get it into policy and so on. And it's sort of beginning to work a tiny bit, but it's a hard graft trying to get people interested in something that's completely invisible most of the time. So, anyway.
Well, yeah, I just thought that was interesting because to me that surprises me, because I would think that policy would be quite interested to know what's in our water that we drink, or like the public, so it'd be easier rather than some obscure animal that lives near Antarctica. But it's probably, I've learned that as soon as something gets larger and more charismatic, it's, you know, people, it's like a light bulb, like, oh, that's really interesting. And I think that can have an effect on how your research, on the impact of your research. So before I moved on to krill, I had a reduced impact of my research. You know, it was very much quite boring infographics, and it's almost like I suddenly realized that I had an audience when I moved on. So it's interesting. I would have thought, yeah, the groundwater would be up there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, what do I think? Well, it's sort of very indicative. So when we unfortunately were part of the EU, of course, there's a huge surface water situation that is monitored, if you like. So Water Framework Directive and such, it's a huge thing. And we were trying very hard to encourage the task force, if you like, to do not a similar thing, but to at least consider the freshwater, groundwater animals, with complete lack of success, actually. Then, however, there is now some interest on a much more local scale in England, at any rate, from the Environment Agency as part of the Natural Capital Impact Assessment. There's a new program that's being rolled out. So I suppose, sooner or later there'll be some interest. But I think when people hear about these groundwater animals, they're always very fascinated. Or polite, yeah, maybe they daren't say anything. But yeah, but that's about as far as it goes. Do you want to say anything in particular?
Just to add a little bit as well to the perspective of the policy that we've been discussing, because I don't know if you remember the 2019, I guess, elections, that every party was like claiming we are going to plant all these million trees, and things like that. And actually, there is a pledge for planting a lot of trees, increasing the coverage in the UK to something like 12% or something like that by 2060. Or if you count the amount of trees that they need to be planted per week, it's crazy. It's like, how are we going to do this? So to understand what we plant, when we plant it, how we plant it, in which combinations, things like that. That's also part of my work. And, it's also influencing a lot my research. So yeah, that is something that we are as well in communication with, with policy and things like that.
Just sort of subtext on what we do for our research. Emma's mentioned, and I'm not sure about you, Estrella, but and I certainly have, doing a lot of field work. So I particularly used to do more field work than I do now. I was really a field ecologist, and then have gradually moved. I've been polluted by my colleagues, if you like, to working more in the lab on microcosm type research. But nevertheless, I have spent a lot of time in really quite remote fieldwork locations, and it's one of the things that we talked about, actually, how that may or may not be different for women, and what we want to think about. I have to say that most of the work that I've done, I mean, it has been very remote, but it's been in very small groups. So a small group of us, maybe 4 or 5 individuals, would be doing this work. And I don't know whether it just shot over my head, but I have to say, I didn't really feel that there was anything particularly special about doing field work. I mean, apart from the fact that it's fantastic locations and everything, but I mean, I didn't feel in any way different from male or other female colleagues, but I'm not sure if that's common.
I mean, I think it's really good that you didn't feel any different. I certainly did. My experience going to sea it's again quite a unique experience. When I was an undergraduate, I used to watch, because I did marine biology and there was an oceanography course, and some people for their projects would actually go to sea, and I remember thinking, gosh, I never want to do that. It sounds awful. And then 2 years later, I was off multiple times doing it, and you basically are kind of put on this ship for 2 to 10 weeks at a time, and you're just with the same people, and it's quite a long time, so it's quite intense. It's like Big Brother, but without the cameras, I guess. And often, actually, we did make a jacuzzi out of a paddling pool once when I was like off the coast of Guatemala, as you are. But what I found was so there would be I hope there's no oceanographers watching. I think, you know, between 20 and 30 scientists sometimes, and maybe a similar number of crew. You have a huge amount of crew to get these massive research ships. And I'm talking kind of Sir David Attenborough, the British Antarctic Survey, those kind of ships. And I would experience that often all of the crew would be male. I've had one, I don't think I ever sailed with a female captain, but there would be female pursers, because it's more of a kind of office, like housekeeping job. I mean, like they'd be in charge of the whole ship, so, you know, still senior. Ooh, you see us now. And then it was better split between the scientists, between men and women. Often there would be, you know, more, the split would be better with more junior scientists, but I'll try not to overshare too much, but just to say that I did experience bullying, by verbal bullying and also verbal sexual abuse on multiple different cruises. And I hope that's changed, but that was in the last 10 years, so not not overly that long ago. But I'm going to pass on before, because I don't want to go into that anymore.
We do some field work, nothing to do like Guatemala and things like that. We're only in the good lands of Staffordshire, so it's not probably that exciting. I am very new to field work. I only started doing field work when I moved to Birmingham. And the first summer I was really nervous, you know, because I had all these student volunteers and, you know, a few members of the group already. And I was like, yeah, they are relying on me to coordinate this. And being a woman, I think in the world of forestry is a man's world, right? There are no head foresters that are women, or, you know, in the forestry industry. So for me, it was a bit of a hard summer when I had to coordinate all that field work, because I was inexperienced. I knew I was inexperienced, and I was in a man's world. So they were all expecting me to fail, kind of thing, you know, like, okay, this is gonna be a disaster. But we did it. So we delivered the field work, and actually we managed to the whole team was very happy, and everything went well. No one broke a leg or anything, which was important for me. But I did experience some situations where, you know, that the technical support, you know, people that work there, or the people in the woodlands, no, in the States, they would not be talking to a man in the way they were talking to me, you know, because sometimes, you know, we are all humans. We can all forget things. We can all make a mistake. And it's like, you are talking to me in a way that if I was a man, you wouldn't be talking to me like that. So that was a bit difficult. And I had to stand up and say, I would prefer if you don't talk to me that way, and, you know, things like that, because, you know, I have apologized already, you know, I didn't know about this or something like that. But that was, yeah. So we do a lot of field work now, and I feel a lot more confident. Still, when I go to a new place, it's like, who am I gonna find, you know, this very old man, you know, probably doesn't like me being in the state or something like that. And then, but no, everyone so far is being really nice. So we go through it.
Yeah. Oh, well, just to say that I, not because of my negative experiences, but I then moved into modeling and computer work because I didn't like the fact that I could only do my science if I decided to essentially quit my life or put it on pause for 7 weeks at a time. It drove me nuts, like being told what I could eat, where I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't see friends or family, like I missed my husband terribly. And now I have a child as well, that pretty much the only, and I'm happy for this to be out there, the only research cruise I will go on is down to Antarctica. Otherwise, I'm not interested. I don't want to go sit in the middle of the ocean, where in the middle of the random Southern Ocean where there's no life and it's really stormy and I'm being sick for 4 weeks. Like, I'm very happy behind my computer and being in England.
Right. Yeah, okay. So I think that I was going to say, I think that takes us on to something else that we wanted to think about a little bit, actually, and that's the whole issue of mentoring and, or you know, how that happens, or is it different for women or not? Does it matter? Should you, you know, how would you choose a mentor if you get that chance? Should it be an official mentor or an unofficial mentor? Is there much point just being allocated somebody? You know, all these sorts of questions, and whether it's, I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that is it tied up with the idea of having role models, same-sex role models, basically, because certainly it's not as bad as it used to be. I can assure you, but yeah, I mean, when I was coming up through the ranks, so to speak, there weren't very many women. There were women, fantastic women actually, but they tended at that time to be what we would call blue stockings. So this is sounds awful to say this. This is people who were very wedded to their jobs, you know, really dedicated to science and got most amazing results. Fantastic. But in terms of a typical family life, you know, that wasn't the case. And I'm really delighted that that's changing now, although of course it does change at different rates depending on exactly what your topic is. I was saying beforehand that I work in a department which is quite mixed in terms of the subjects that we cover, and most of the professors are female, in fact. So, you know, and a lot of the readers too. So the balance is very, very different, but I understand in other places that it's still very dominated by one sex, and that sex is not female. So, but I don't know, what do you think about mentors? Is it, well, oh, okay.
Yeah, I like mentors. Definitely, I think is one of the crucial things of your career. So who has a mentor here? Do you have? Yeah? Okay, cool. Kind of like an official. Okay. Yeah, so I always say that there is never enough mentors. You can have a lot of mentors, but make those mentors official, you know, that you can get something out of it. So I have had mentors, 3 in total, through official programs, and they have always been women, but never in my field. And that has been the best thing for me, because that's one of the things that we were discussing in that chat that we had before doing this, that, you know, normally when you choose a mentor, that mentor is in your field, and you think, actually, this is going to be better because, you know, like it's going to tell me, you know, some things about research, it can guide me through the research. But if you want a career mentor, then it doesn't matter in what field that person is. It is important that it's ahead of you, and it can guide, because it needs to signpost the direction. So to say, I want to get there, I want to get to be a professor. So what do I need to do? It doesn't matter if you work with plants or you work with, you know, whatever, neuroscience. The important is, how did you get there? What are the steps that you need to do to climb up in this institution? So I think a mentor from your institution is really important, because every institution is different. But yeah, definitely someone that has climbed that ladder, and then it can guide you through the steps, but not necessarily in your field at all. That is my take home.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just needs to be in academia if that's where you're going to stay. Yeah, I have mentors as well. I think most of mine or all of mine have been what people that I've sought out and asked to mentor me. A lot have been men actually, who, or maybe that aren't even mentors, but just champion me, and that's been so important. You know, I think that everybody needs that in their career, probably not even just in academia, but I feel really lucky to have found that. And at the moment, I have kind of a male mentor who's also my line manager, and a female mentor. And it's interesting. I really like having both, because they both tell me different things. One will tell me, right, go for promotion next year. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to get you through. How do we do this? Like, yes, this is what I did. And then females are more inclined to say, oh, but do you really need to do that this year? That might be more work. You've just got this, so why do you need to move up? And that could just be my experience, but it's really interesting to like see the difference. And I'm very much like, well, I want to be a professor yesterday, so I'm gonna, you know, go with the first example. But it's also really important for me to hear the women, and particularly, you know, those who have families, because it does affect your your life, your ability, your capability to have brain space to go through these processes. So I definitely think that actually for men and women, having male and female mentors is probably really important.
Yeah, actually, I think my experience is completely the opposite because, yeah, I have just been through promotion, and it was successful. But I had didn't know to go whether I should go for associate professor or full professor, and like I prepared the application. I was like, I'm a bit borderline to professor. I'm probably not gonna get it. And then I talked to my mentor. It's my official mentor. She's a woman. She's a professor, higher up in the university. And she was like, you are underscoring yourself. What are you doing? Why don't you put a 6 there? You put in a 4 or things like that. And then I sent my application to some people in the department, and the deputy head of a school, he's a man, and he said, no, this is just a associate, like, no, you're scoring yourself fine. And then, it was like, okay, but she's actually higher than you. She's been head of a school, and she's higher up the ranks of the university. So for me, it was like the female was the one that it was pushing towards, like that's saying you are underscoring. You need to score yourself higher. And the man was like, no, you're fine. So I don't know. It's a bit different. Oh, I did associate only. It was a bit borderline, so maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add as well that I found that having a mentor that's been through the similar career path to you is quite useful, or like one of your many mentors. So again, my line manager is somebody who's gone through the fellowship, then onto the academic pathway, which is the kind of pathway that I'm going through. It's a really odd one, and even other academics don't quite understand what certain different appointments mean and what it means to be a fellow versus lecturer, and what happens when you get off, and the different difficulties and challenges you have. And some things are actually easier when you've done that pathway. So also trying to find people that, who've done the unique pathway that you're on as well is helpful.
Well, I don't have much to add, I suppose, just to say that it's quite flattering that people think that being a professor is great. I can tell you it's not all that it's cracked up to be, but anyway, what I would say is that you never run out of needing a mentor. So I do have a mentor, and one mainly, really, I suppose. But we tend not to discuss career objectives as such, but more potentially direction of research. So. I mean, that sounds a bit heavy saying that, but sort of specifically grant applications, this sort of thing. So it's still there, but it does change a little bit. Okay, so I'm sort of slightly aware of time, but I really, really wanted for us to talk a bit about dissemination, research dissemination, and how that works, particularly in the context of climate change, because certainly my experience has been that people tend to sort of almost like sort of jump on you a bit when say, oh, you do something to do with climate change, that's a really hot topic, let's get you to do this, let's get you to do the other. And I'm just wondering, it's like coping strategies, isn't it, that you have to have? I mean, on the one hand, we want to disseminate our research, but on the other hand, it has to be the right sort of dissemination and not a sort of greenwashing type of approach, I suppose. I don't know whether anyone wants to.
This is something that I kind of struggle with on a daily basis. I've mentioned, to Anne before this, that I went to COP26 in November, which was amazing. But my work was headline news of the conference, no. But it has been used and cited by IPCC reports. And because I don't know if any of you heard, I don't know, maybe it's a bit random, but in ocean science, there's this thing called the whale pump, and there's kind of been headlines, maybe even in like The Guardian, about whales being able to store all this carbon, but then there's people lobbying against it because companies like Shell and BP are kind of might come along and say, oh, well, we're going to protect this area of the ocean, because, you know, we won't do drilling there or whatever, and that's going to save like 20 whales, which is going to sequester this amount of carbon. And it's kind of terrifying because it's not how it works. And then when you see them kind of cite your work, which is not saying that at all, it's just giving a number of carbon, it kind of then almost makes me as a scientist want to stop publishing. But going to COP made me realize that actually I need to do more and to actually put more numbers out that are, you know, have all these caveats, and to almost be bolder with statements instead of just saying, oh, it's X amount, but it could contribute kind of, it's really important. Just be like, actually, it's this and it's really small, or just to be really clearer in messaging, because I've had people contact me about like the Elon Musk X Prize, which is like, if you come up with an idea of how to store carbon in the ocean, then he will give different people £100 million. And they're like, oh, what about if we just grow more krill? And I'm like, oh, we don't even know if krill is better because another animal might be better. And it's actually been really overwhelming. And for me personally, about where to go with that, and should I say no to requests from NGOs? Like, I work a lot with WWF, and should I say no to them? Actually, I don't want to work with you on getting this number, because I can already see how it's going to be spun up, and I know all of the errors in the data and all of the holes. But then it's like, if I don't do it, somebody else will just, who's not a scientist, will kind of take it and extrapolate it. So I do grapple with that every day, but I'm trying to be brave. And also, it's just terrifying how important science can become. I think nobody really cared about plankton poo 10 years ago when I started this. I thought I would just be in a hole in the ocean somewhere doing my thing. And now suddenly, yeah, with climate change, it's all become a lot more important.
Yeah, similar. Actually, the same with forestry. So not many people used to think about forestry, but now that we know that, you know, forests capture all this carbon and they are so good for us and everything, then now everyone wants to work in forestry. So yeah, I also went to COP26, but as a bit of a newbie kind of thing. And for me, it was really overwhelming, the whole thing. But when I was talking to people and participating in a few events and things like that, everyone was asking me like, okay, well, what do we plant? No, because it's like, okay, we need to plant trees or stop cutting down trees, but especially all the afforestation strategies. And the question was that, what do we plant? What species? What is the best thing? And I'm like, I don't know, you know, like, so yeah, I can see where all these, you know, the media starts taking specific points, and, you know, the society as well, policymakers, you know, we do have a few studies, for example, now some results that we know that mixed plantations are actually more resistant to diseases. And there are some trees specifically, in particular, cherry trees, that actually help ash trees to defend themselves against a fungal pathogen that causes ash dieback and is killing all the ash trees. We do have that information. We haven't tested that, whether, you know, that is the case in the wild, in the, you know, in the woodlands, in mature trees. We've done this in a mixed plantation that is called trees that are 10 years old. But I know that as soon as we publish something, then everything is going to be picked up as, let's plant cherries everywhere. You know, the cherries are the saviors of everything. So yeah, the dissemination is really important, how you do it, because we are all very sad that the ash trees are dying, you know, that the oak trees are dying, or, you know, some other tree species. But yeah, you cannot just jump into the conclusions that quickly.
So just going to say, I think we'll probably wrap up very soon, but I mean, one of the things that I've been sort of concluding over the last few years actually is well, I mean, we've been talking about this already, the fact that non-scientists, and that is the majority of people really, particularly in the political world, you know, don't really understand the holes in the data. I mean, you say that, I don't want to say there are any holes in your data, but you know, that we're always very cautious, or try to be very cautious, when we put the information out there. But of course, all they do is go for the complete headline, and so you've got to be really cautious about that. And one of the things I've been trying to do, although it's slightly tangential to this, is to work more with interdisciplinary teams. So, you know, recently I've been working more with colleagues who on it's a really interesting project actually called The Rights of Nature, which is a different way of stewardship. Basically, it's not even stewardship, shouldn't say that, but it's giving, if you like, the natural world legal rights, and appointing guardians and so on. And that's really brought it home to me how you can approach something like climate change or like habitat loss or whatever you want to say from so many different perspectives. And sometimes it really helps to get a bunch of people in the room, you know, a philosopher, a lawyer, you know, a business person, you know, or a humanities person or whatever, and to come at it from all different angles. And sometimes the results of that can be quite interesting. Well, I was thinking that we should stop. Yeah.
So thanks very much. And yeah, if everyone has any other questions, I went to a seminar recently where there was a minute pause for everyone to think of questions, which is quite nice.
So we'll just have a Q&A and we'll give people just under a minute. You guys can have a drink and people can think of a question. So I have a question which we could start with maybe to get people warmed up. And it's kind of following on from the what you were just discussing about research dissemination. So when you're engaging with the non-scientific kind of general public, how do you kind of get them to care about your quite niche, but as you've discussed, very important research topics, as opposed to like the scientific? Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, actually. And I think, actually, I've always been, maybe it's because I pick my audiences, I don't know. But I've always found that people are really interested, actually, about, well, let's say groundwater in my case, or plastic. Of course, they're interested in plastic, but you know, they're innately very interested. But I think what they don't want is huge amounts of data, you know. So really simple take-home messages, but people are interested, and they're, you know, just because they don't have the background and the expertise doesn't mean to say that they can't form an opinion, really. And you know.
Yeah, I think I mentioned about, you know, I kind of moved on to krill because I realized people were interested, but yeah, instead of talking about like biological carbon pump or particulate organic carbon, I would talk about poo. And on Twitter, use like poo emoji a lot. I always enjoyed that. Sometimes I think like in job interviews or grant stuff, I think it's not gone so well, where I've been a bit too relaxed in my talk. I think in one job interview, I was like, imagine how many times a day you poo. Well, think about that in the ocean. And then I realized I got all of them thinking about like going to the toilet, and I didn't get that job. So I do think there's a fine line with oversharing, but also, yeah, kind of like, you know, making sure it's still signed. It is actually, yeah, there is a boundary, I guess.
Yeah, I think it is, for me, is to try to kind of like see the importance of the research in a way that I kind of bring it down to why it's important for them, basically. So I recently recorded a podcast with the BBC World Services, and before the podcast interview, I spent actually maybe a couple of hours with the producer, explaining her everything, you know, like kind of bringing it all down to the basics and why it was important and everything. And then is when she did a beautiful interview, because all the questions were like, yes, you know, she's asking me this, you know, and we had not prepared the questions or anything. Everything was kind of like a conversation, but we had to spend that time. So I think it's very important to bring it, you know, to break it into pieces and always highlight why it's important, and important maybe not for the whole society, you know, and the whole world, but important for her, you know, for the presenter, for the person that is writing the questions. It's like, oh, don't you remember that, you know, the ash trees that are, you know, around your area, things like that, like kind of like trying to connect her with the research. So yeah, that was my approach.
Thank you very much. I have a question that kind of relates to this challenge in the communication between scientists and the data and the rest of the world. And I was wondering, like, what's the process for you as a scientist in talking to policymakers, and then how do you make that happen, and what are the barriers that prevent those policies from really happening as they should be? Between now and 2050 especially. So it applies to all of you, I guess.
Because I don't really have that much experience with like policy making or things like that, but again, it is to try to showcase the importance of your research. So we have contributed to evidence call. So from the government has like a call for evidence of a particular matter, and then all scientists can contribute to that. But that's how far my experience goes. It's actually a very interesting question. I would like to know exactly what happens after those evidence are submitted, and then I don't know.
Earlier this year I spent 2 to 3 months working at DEFRA, so in government, on secondment, and yeah, they are split into, I mean, they're so split up, all these teams, and there's like hundreds of people just working at DEFRA, so that's the environment department, and they have evidence teams and they have policy teams, and the evidence teams go and collect the science evidence, like they put out the calls that you can respond to, and then it's their job internally to like present that to the policy team, and then it's up to the policy team, you know, to see whether they can implement it, whether it makes sense, whether, you know, it's like legally possible, and then it kind of eventually becomes law. So there are so many channels that it's quite rare, I think, as scientists to see like a direct policy change. And so I don't think that should well, it should be the goal, but it shouldn't be like, oh, I've only achieved policy if I've done that. And so for me, I've also, you know, that was quite a unique experience, but there's loads of opportunities to do that. I found out through the Imperial Forum that opportunity was available, but I've always just worked with academics that have links, so that are directly involved for me in Antarctic treaty or things like that, and also going through NGOs. NGOs have a lot of direct policy links, and they're very loud and they can say whatever they want, and so I found them to be a really good way of making those links.
I don't have too much to add, actually, but I don't know what it's like here, but certainly we have sort of impact officers. So in our department, whose job it is to generate interest in research, in our research, really. So that's another branch. I mean, I don't think. I do find it, I have found it very, very difficult sometimes to get the right person. And I think this is what you were saying in terms of DEFRA, that identifying who it sounds, but I don't mean it quite like this, who it's worth talking to, you know, who is the right person to talk to, is really quite tricky. And I don't really have the answer. But when you do get hold of somebody who's useful, don't let them go. You know, just keep very friendly with them. You know, and keep on with it. But
you were talking about field work and your experiences of field work and things like that, and I'm very sorry about your experience. That's really not good. And I also had similar experiences, and I was definitely turned away from field work by the time I was like 23. I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do that. And I very happily have sat at a computer by myself for 4 years doing my PhD. And I'm also the same. Like, if for me to do field work now, it would have to be one hell of an opportunity for me to put myself in that position again. And I think maybe this is like a really, really hard question, but
is there a way past that? Like, I think I'm concerned that there's a lot of women that don't go into those kinds of areas because they're like, I don't want to do field work. And I think that's quite scary because I don't want to do it, nothing to do with my ability to do field work, but it's just like the complexities of being a woman in rural Africa by yourself. And I found that when I've tried to voice those opinions to male colleagues, they sort of look at me like I'm hysterical. And yeah, I guess, is there a way past that? Is there a way through it? I don't really know. So sorry if I put you on the spot a lot.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry about that too, but it kind of makes me feel better, like solidarity in our misery. I think that when like this stuff happened to me, like it was two separate occasions, or maybe more to be honest, but like two that I remember, two separate field works and 2 separate years. It's not like it was just one bad group. That like one time it was called out by my supervisor because it was just so blatantly bullying, and he was like, do you want me to report it? But it was in front of so many people, and I just felt like, oh, that's so embarrassing. And like, you know, and I think he did have a word with that person and it stopped and it was okay, but then I still had to remain on this isolated ship with the person that had, you know, said something multiple times to me. And yeah, and that's really awkward, but he did call it out, and that made me feel safer because I knew that I just didn't really have to deal with this person, and I was kind of like, it wasn't so severe that I couldn't really move past it. But then the other occasion, which was worse because that was more sexual, nobody said anything, and again it was in front of people, and they all just sat there because he was the most senior person, and it just didn't get called out at all. And it was just, I remember just being there like, oh my word, what is going on? And so I think that it is just like a systemic culture thing that has to change, where one, you know, we are learning more, that we all have to do these courses like on EDI and everything, and I hope that, and I think that it is being called out more, but it's that whole issue that we have in society of abuse, of like, you don't want to report it because you don't want to relive that experience. And I see that going on, you know, even in not in fieldwork situations, just in work colleagues situation where inappropriate behavior is happening. You don't want to, you know, you've managed to emotionally move on from it, but you don't want to have to go back and report it. So I think trying to work out how to report it, but I think actually having other people that know about it, whether they witness it or not, call it up, will help stop that behavior. But until then, I don't see how that's, you know, why would women want to put themselves through that? Because fieldwork is already hard because, as I've said, you're putting your life on hold. It takes months to organize, months to de-organize, kind of thing, to then go and be traumatized. You know, it's just, yeah, it's difficult.
We do have the strategy to acknowledge that this happened. So in the technical support, it's all men, no, in the States, and all the field work that we do in the institute. And yeah, I kept hearing things, you know, like, oh, I don't like what this woman is telling me, or that other woman is telling me. So I raised it, you know, I said like, something is going on in the background, and we just need to acknowledge the fact that all the technical support are men, and there are a lot of women students, postdocs, academics, etc. And we are not completely comfortable with how things work. So for the last 2 years, more or less, we've had an EDI committee. And it is not just like the typical committee that is just there just to tick a box or something like that. It's actually, you know, like we put on the table things that are important and that could cause a problem for women. So we openly talk about it, like literally, like we have sessions where we just talk. And, you know, like obviously people get offended and things like that, but they are kind of like a safe space to actually put up a problem out there, to say, this can be a problem. Maybe men don't see it, that it will be a problem, but this will be a problem, or is a problem already. So it's kind of like exposing all those situations. So it's quite of an active committee. And I think that is the way forward. The first thing is to acknowledge that there could be a problem, and then before things kind of like spin out of control, then you put solutions to them. But it's very difficult, I guess. So.
I was going to say, I think the acknowledgement thing is really good though, because like you said, like there needs to be space for
he wasn't saying that in a, that sounds awful, and he wasn't saying it like, he was saying it like best interest at heart, he was saying like, this is what it's like, so just think things through before you take this forward. And I know other women that have been told the same thing, that like, okay, you could report it, but think about your career. And I think that maybe if more people, if those conversations are like more often talked about, then that would be less like women having these conversations quietly by themselves in like the toilet. And it would be like, this is the thing, let's all kind of pick up to it. So.
I think it's to find contingencies and a strategy before the actual problem happens. And we also have a system that there are a few people in HR specifically working for the institute and in the EDI committee. So if there is any problem, you don't have to raise it with the directorship or with anything. You just go directly straight to HR. And that is a safe route because they are working within the committee. They know that that problems could arise. So they are already kind of like prone, trying to actually respond to you. So yeah.
I think that's all we've got time for.
Okay.
So everyone join me in thanking our amazing speakers.